Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar on the call to action of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. My name is Alberto Carillo. I work for WWF International, and here with me is Lindsay Long, who is Communication Specialist for the World Resources Institute. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss about the call to action of the Science-Based Targets Initiative. The Science-Based Targets Initiative is a joint effort between CDP, the World Resources Institute, the UN Global Compact, and WWF. And today's agenda, in today's agenda, we will discuss about the different eligibility criteria and process to set targets under under the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Lindsay, can you see my screen there?
Okay, yes, you're back. I can see your screen and we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Sorry for this technical issue. Okay. Well, the Science-Based Targets Initiative has been running for the last year and a half. And as part of this initiative, we have several components. Some components are intended to facilitate the adoption of science-based targets. And we're also running this call to action, which is a campaign calling on companies to adopt emission reduction targets that are in line with a 2-degree trajectory. And the goal that we have for this call to action is to get commitments from 100 companies to adopt science-based targets by the end of this year. And then that by the end of 2020, we have 250 companies already setting science-based targets. We have a process that we are using for the call to action. And basically, in this process, companies are invited to express their intention to set a science-based target through a commitment letter, which is the first step, then to develop a science-based target within 24 months after commitment, then to submit the target for quality check once the target has been developed, and finally to announce the target. And now we will explain each of these steps in more detail. Starting with the commitment to set a science-based target. We have on our website, sciencebasedtargets.org, a commitment letter. And basically, in this commitment letter, you can read in more detail the eligibility criteria for the call to action, which I will explain in more detail in a few slides. And basically, the commitment letter is simply encouraging companies to commit to set a science-based target within 24 months after the commitment letter is submitted to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. The commitment letter and the target submission form need to be sent to the info@sciencebasedtargets.org address. And yeah, this is the first step in the process. Then once the commitment letter is submitted, companies have up to 24 months to develop the target. And there are different criteria for developing this target, which I will explain now. And before, well, 6 months before the deadline, we will be sending you a reminder, and we will be working with you in this process of developing a target. Once the target is in place, then the target needs to be submitted for quality check, which is the next step in the process. And let me explain to you how the quality check process is working. We have within the Science-Based Targets Initiative a technical working group and a steering committee. The technical working group does an in-detail analysis of the target, and then based on the recommendation from the technical reviewer, the steering committee recommends for approval of the target, or sometimes it can also lead to some additional questions and clarifications on the proposed target. And basically the criteria that are used to analyze the target are the criteria that you see on the screen right now, which is that the target should cover all company-wide emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions as per the GHG Protocol corporate standard. The target has to, if Scope 3 emissions represent more than 40% of the overall company's emissions, then the company is also expected to set an ambitious Scope 3 target, and we'll show some examples on what is considered an ambitious Scope 3 target. The time frame of the target should cover a period of 5 years as a minimum from the date of announcement of the target. So for instance, if the target is announced this year, then the target should cover a period up to 2020 as a minimum. Then the most important criterion, of course, is that the level of ambition of the target should be consistent with the level of decarbonization required to keep temperature increase within 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial temperatures. And companies that participate in the call to action are expected to report progress against the target by disclosing their greenhouse gas inventory on an annual basis. So these are the basic eligibility criteria for the call to action. And we have also some additional guidance and some recommendations for companies that participate in the call to action. Companies are required to set a target that goes 5 years from the date of announcement, but they are encouraged also to develop mid-term and long-term targets. 2030 or 2050 are targets that we are encouraging companies to adopt with their respective interim milestones. We are also encouraging companies to express their targets on an absolute and on an intensity basis, although companies can choose one of those two. And then, given that targets are forward-looking and are based on different assumptions made by the companies and also climate scenarios that are subject to refinement, then we also recommend that companies recalculate their targets whenever some of the assumptions change, and this has an impact on the target that has been estimated. And we also recommend companies to check the robustness of the assumptions that are used before the targets are submitted. Now, in terms of Scope 3 recommendations, we are requiring companies to do a scope 3 screening before setting their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, with the purpose of identifying whether scope 3 is relevant for the company or not. And as already mentioned, when scope 3 represents more than 40% of the total carbon footprint of the company, then we also expect companies to set ambitious scope 3 targets. And we are suggesting companies to set ambitious targets for the top 3 emission categories as per the GHG protocol corporate value chain standard. There's no specific recommendation about how these scope 3 targets should look like, but we have some examples that we have identified as best practice for setting scope 3 targets. The first example that we would like to present today is Sony. Sony has a long-term vision, which is to achieve zero environmental footprint by 2050. And as part of this long-term vision, they have also developed a long-term goal, an aspirational goal of reducing the company's carbon footprint by 90% by 2050. And this includes scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. So this is the long-term target of the company that, as you can see, includes all scopes. And they also have scope 1 and scope 2 interim targets, which is an absolute reduction of 42% compared to 2000 levels. And this is translated as 5% compared to the emissions that they have in 2015. And they have also defined emission reduction targets for the main scope 3 categories. So in this case, for instance, they have identified and defined a target to reduce energy consumption for their products. So this is one example of an ambitious scope 3 target. Then we also have Konica Minolta, which have also a long-term vision of reducing CO2 emissions through the product life cycle by 80% by 2050. This is compared to the emissions in 2005. In order to achieve this target, they are envisioning a number of activities in their value chain, including, for instance, an efficient use of resources and materials in their products, and also strategies to recycle and reclaim materials. So this is, of course, again, considering that the long-term target involves an absolute reduction of 80% of scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. We also consider this as a best practice. Finally, we have Rico, which has also a long-term target of reducing their absolute emissions by 87.5% by 2050, compared to the emissions in 2000, sorry. And then they also have an interim target of reducing their life cycle emissions by 30% by 2020. Again, including scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And again, in order to achieve this goal, they have identified and defined specific activities and targets for the different emission categories and different strategies, like, for instance, reduce the use and replace materials that have a significant impact on their environmental footprint. So these are just a few examples of good scope 3 targets that we have identified as best practices. And of course, the target will depend on where emissions are spread across the value chain for different companies. Now, financial institutions are encouraged to express also their intention to set science-based targets for Scope 1 and Scope 2 and for their investment-related activities. However, given that current methodologies are more suitable for non-financial institutions, and that this is an area that is currently under development, we are not able to assess the targets yet. So by committing to setting a science-based target, we expect to work with these financial institutions in the development of the methodologies and methods to assess particularly investment-related targets. And so if there's any financial institution in the call, we look forward to working with you in this area. Well, now I would like to invite Lindsay to comment a little more on the process of announcing the targets.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. Again, my name is Lindsay Long, and I'm a communications specialist with the World Resources Institute working on the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And I'm going to take just a few minutes, just present 2 slides on how we like to give recognition to the companies that join the initiative. Alberto, if you can advance to the next slide, please. Thanks so much. Okay, so on the most basic level, all companies that join the call to action, either by committing to setting a science-based target or by having a science-based target, will be recognized on the Science-Based Targets website. If you go to our website now, you might notice that we have not yet listed any companies. We do have some companies that we are getting ready to announce that have joined the initiative, and we'll be making that announcement soon. And then after that initial announcement, you'll see that list of companies grow over time. So we'll just continually add to that list. Additionally, for companies that have a science-based target, we would like to explore writing kind of longer, more in-depth profiles of those companies. You could think of it as like a mini case study on why the company's leadership decided to set a science-based target, what challenges and opportunities that the company faced during the process of setting a science-based target. That's really an opportunity for us to kind of share lessons learned with other similar companies and to elevate the voices of the business leaders who took this important step. Alberto, can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. And then additionally, we have some opportunities ahead of us in the coming months and in the coming year to really elevate the voices of business leaders as spokespeople for the initiative. So a few just simple examples: press releases, social media campaigns, speaking opportunities at events, blogs, opinion editorials. These are different ways in which we really want to elevate those voices and have your company's story told. So that's something that companies that join the initiative can work with us on. And that's it for announcements and profiling. Alberto, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, so before going to questions and answers, we would like to share with you some of our plans for the coming months. Right now, we are continuing to work on refining a methodology that was launched in May this year, the SDA methodology, that you can find on our website. And particularly some of the areas that we are working on in more detail are setting science-based targets for Scope 3 emissions and refining also more some sectors that are currently not developed in detail in the methodology. We have also an SDA online tool that is under beta testing, and we are continuing to work on this online tool to make it more user-friendly. And then a major deliverable that we have for this year for the Science-Based Targets Initiative is a Science-Based Target Setting Manual. And a draft of this manual is gonna be published in a few days for public consultation. And we are going to have some stakeholder workshops in some workshops in the US, some workshops in Europe, and probably some workshops in Asia and in Africa. And so we invite you to keep in touch so that we can inform you about the details of these workshops. After the stakeholder consultation workshops, we expect to revise the manual and to have a final draft ready by COP21. Another main milestone of the initiative is a target tracker. And in this target tracker, we expect to reflect companies' emissions and companies' targets, and to be able to track where companies are against their targets. And again, you will be hearing more about this specific deliverable in the coming months. CDP has also been working on incorporating science-based targets into their questionnaire and their scoring criteria. And there's also the expectation that the criteria for incorporating science-based targets into CDP scoring are going to be ready by the end of this year. And finally, in terms of communications, we have two main events. There's one happening next week during Climate Week in New York, and then during COP21. And for Climate Week, there's a workshop that is happening next Friday. And during this workshop, we will discuss about the initiative, and we will showcase and announce a first batch of companies that have committed to set science-based targets, and also companies that are already announcing their science-based emission reduction targets. So this is an event that is happening next Friday. And then during COP21, there's the Caring for Climate Business Forum, which is expected to be a large business forum. And in this forum, we will have science-based targets as one of the main topics and main initiatives to be discussed. And we also expect to use the private sector, the Caring for Climate Business Forum, as a platform to showcase companies that have adopted science-based targets during this period. The Caring for Climate Business Forum is comprised of two main components. A plenary type of event where we expect to have over 500 participants, and then a high-level meeting where business leaders are going to discuss also with UN officials and policymakers. And the main topic during this second component, the high-level meeting, is going to be focused on carbon pricing, but also it is expected that science-based targets is going to be one of the key topics to be discussed there. So finally, we would also like to invite you to participate in the different webinars that we are organizing. We have some webinars like these, which are more focused on the process to join the call to action and the different criteria. But we also have some more technical webinars where we discuss the different methodologies to set science-based targets, where we go in more detail into the SDA methodology. And we invite you to also visit our website and follow our social media to be informed about these webinars. So with this, I would like to open the floor for questions. And there's a question box in your control panel. And we invite you to write the questions there, and then we can take the questions. Or if you want to unmute yourself, please also feel free to do so.
Alberto, this is Lindsay. Looks like we have a few questions in the questions box already. And just a note about unmuting. I'm not sure if you have a question that you'd like to voice verbally, just let me know in the questions box and I'll unmute you because I'm not sure if people have the ability to unmute themselves. But let's go ahead and start with the questions in the questions box. Alberto, can you see those questions?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe it's just because I'm the organizer. Then I can go ahead and just read them aloud, and then Alberto, you can answer them. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so we have a question here about Scope 3. It says how to tackle that complex aspect as a retailer. What is the approach of retailers who made that commitment?
So at the moment, we are analyzing a couple of cases of retailers, and it is indeed a complex situation. So I mean, I think there's no template that can be used for all retailers. It really depends on where the company is in terms of measuring their Scope 3 emissions and yeah, setting emission reductions across the value chain. But if you have any particular question, or if you would like us to check what you have in mind for Scope 3, we can also set up a bilateral call and assess the case in more detail.
Great. Yeah, I think that's an important point that we are available to answer kind of more specific questions. Okay, and the next question here is for multinational companies, are goals expected to cover the scope of all companies or can be applied to individual companies?
Well, the expectation is that companies that the targets cover company-wide emissions. So we would expect target covering the whole company.
Great. Okay, next question. Do the science-based targets give any credit for early action? Some companies have been setting and achieving substantial reduction goals over the past 20 years. Others haven't been as committed to reductions in the past. How does the science-based targets process take this into account? I can speak to this one a little bit, but first, Alberto, do you have a reaction to that?
Go ahead, Lindsay, and then I can complement it.
Okay. Sure. So for all companies that join the call to action through the process that Alberto outlined, like I mentioned before, all companies will be recognized. But I do think that for companies that have a story that they really want to tell, so if it's been, hey, we've been committed to this for a long time, this is our story over the past 20 years, we'd be very happy to help tell that story. And so we have some mechanisms for that, like that kind of case study model that I discussed earlier. Maybe there's a business leader at your company that would be really great to author an op-ed or author a blog. We certainly do want to work with companies to tell their story. So I think the answer is yes, we could certainly work with you to tell your story.
Thank you, Lindsay. Maybe if I can comment something on the more technical side.
Sure.
Some of the methodologies that are available to set science-based targets, and in particular the SDA methodology, recognizes early action taken by companies. And basically, the target that a company sets using this methodology, it differs depending on the initial carbon intensity of the company. So if a company has already a lower carbon intensity, for instance, or lower emissions, then the emission reduction pathway is going to be less steep than other companies that have a higher carbon intensity. So this is already considered in some of the methodologies that are available. And then the other point that I wanted to mention is the initiative is really encouraging more ambitious targets, and that's the reason why we have the criteria of having targets that go at least 5 years from the date of announcement of the target, but we have the base year open. And the reason for having that flexibility is also to accommodate different base years and to be able to take into account early action by companies.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next question. Is there a set expectation on base year or flexible similar to past? That's the question.
So maybe it's what I just mentioned. There's no expectation in terms of base year, but there's expectation that the target drives additional emission reductions.
Okay, great. All right, next question. I noticed in the 3 best practice examples you provided, all 3 companies set a baseline year at 2000. Was that arbitrary and coincidental, or is 2000 an encouraged baseline year?
No, I think it's coincidental. There's no requirement of any particular base year. And we actually think that using more recent base years is preferable, but there's no particular requirement on this.
Great. Okay, and this is the last question that I have in front of me now. Oh, no, one just came in, so we have 2. Okay, next question. Is there any certification offered to cover measurements at scope 1, 2, and 3? It seems that scope 3 is still to be determined.
I'm not sure what is meant by certification, but I mean, what we are seeing is some companies are presenting targets, inventories that have been verified, and I mean, this is, I would say, the first level of assurance. And then once the target is presented to Science-Based Targets Initiative, the target goes through a quality check process. And after this quality check process, we get back to the company confirming whether the target is in line with the criteria defined for the initiative. And after that, the company is listed on the website and profiled. So this is, I would say, the type of certification and the type of assurance that we are following for targets submitted under the initiative.
Great. Okay, so then I have one more question. So someone has asked, oh, and another one just came in. Okay, so 2 more. What's the basis for identifying carbon intensity, even within a sector, say chemicals? There is a huge difference between producing, say, ethylene copolymer resin versus simply forming a plastic part from that resin. And Alberto, I know that's a little bit of a lengthier question, so I can assign that to you, and you should be able to read it. Let me know if you cannot read it and you'd like me to repeat it.
Yeah. So I mean, well, it depends on the methodologies. Some of the methodologies, for instance, use value added, and then they use economic carbon intensity. And some methodologies, and in particular the SDA methodology that was developed as part of this initiative, is using carbon intensity, but only for what we call homogeneous sectors. So, for instance, power production, cement production, steel production, for which it makes sense to use physical carbon intensity, and then to use that as a way to derive a target. But for more heterogeneous sectors like the chemical sector, right now the SDA methodology doesn't have a way to determine carbon intensity target based on physical activity because of this complexity. So this is a method that is available only for certain sectors.
Great. Okay, and we have another question here. This is a good question. If I did not realize any carbon inventory in the past 5 years, can I do my first in this year and join the call to action using this as a baseline?
Yes, absolutely. That's no problem. As long as the target goes 5 years from the date of announcement of the target. So let's say the inventory is finalized this year, and then the target is announced next year, and the target covers a 5-year period, then that should be fine.
Okay, well, those are all of the questions. If nobody else has any additional questions that they'd like to enter into the questions box, then Alberto, is there anything that you'd like to wrap up with? Any final words?
Well, just to thank everyone for their time and attention, and we really look forward to having many more companies committing to science-based targets in the coming weeks and months.
Great. And then one last thing from me, in the chat box, I'm entering right now the URL to the web page that has all of the information you need on joining the call to action, and please don't hesitate to reach out to the initiative with questions. And thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Bye.